Hello, my favorite pupils. My name is Ms. Weaver, and I teach my students how to become more effective communicators so they can reach their academic and professional goals while also strengthening their personal relationships. So let's get to it. The attendance question of the day is, what is your favorite social media platform? I used to have a MySpace and I started using Facebook when they were just starting out. However, I quickly learned that I was not a fan of massive trauma dumping on a daily basis, so I kind of got rid of them and I did not miss them at all. It wasn't until recently that I started watching motivation videos on YouTube and the occasional daily dose. But creating videos was something I didn't think would ever happen, yet here I am. So today's lecture is about labels. I just want to start out with redefining the term normal. So normal, quote unquote, is an average person, but most people fall close to average, but nobody is actually normal, especially not 100% of the time. It's not possible to be that basic for starters. So anytime I say normal during this lecture, just do keep in mind that I do have little quotation marks in them because there's no such thing as normal. Most people will experience a diagnosable mental illness at some point in time during their lifetime. In fact, according to an infographic by the National Alliance on Mental Illnesses in 2020 during the pandemic, it says among US adults, 1 in 5 experienced a mental illness. That's a lot. 1 in 20 experienced a serious mental illness, and 12 plus million had thoughts of suicide. Obviously, that was an unprecedented time in our history, but nevertheless, it is something that we can all relate to. When we go through life altering events, maybe a bad breakup, a loved one passes away, years wasted in toxic environments, we do hold on to those experiences. We aren't always able to just let it go in the time frame in which we are expected to suddenly be just okay with everything that happened. Sometimes things impact us very deeply and can actually affect us years later. Regardless, I think social media has influenced us to believe there is more wrong with us than there actually is. I started teaching this lecture when I heard more sorry, self-diagnosed cases than the number of students that I had in my classroom. Everyone has a bipolar sister flipping moods every 10 minutes. Everyone has an ex who is a total narcissist. And every student has a late assignment because their best friend is completely depressed and they were up all night talking them through a bad test grade. You see, social media has a superpower. We are now able to self-diagnose our disorders and those of others by simply watching a 30-second clip of some random content creator ranting about the stranger they met in the subway last night who clearly has schizophrenic split personality disorder, which, by the way, those are two completely different disorders, and it's actually called dissociative identity disorder. But we'll get into that a little bit later. It is entirely impossible to boil down these complex disorders into bite-sized, easily understandable, and consumable chunks. They take bits and pieces and simplify the information to the point where anyone can self-diagnose themselves with almost anything and everything, using these nibbles of information like running through a checklist. Yep, I have this. Yep, he's definitely that. Hey, I didn't know they met my sister. When I received my bachelor's degree in psychology several years ago, I did learn that people are interested in psychology for one of two reasons: to find out what's wrong with them or to figure out what's wrong with everybody else. I also learned that even the professionals have difficulty understanding and diagnosing these ever developing disorders, and psychologists know about as much about the brain as biologists know about our oceans. And the truth is, it's not that much. That's why somebody can devote their entire profession to researching only one single disorder, such as addiction, and they are only one person within a massive field. With that being said, I am going to be a hypocrite today and tell you a bit about a few popularized disorders with the intent that maybe I will disrupt some of the misconceptions that I have heard from my students throughout the years. Do keep in mind that some of this information might be incorrect or outdated due to the fact that I learned all of this when I was still a student. There very well might be new information that I am unaware of, but in full disclosure, I am an English teacher now, and my job is simply to teach students how to do their own research and come up with their own interpretations of what they find. To get back on topic, this lesson is to explain to my students a few misconceptions presented by social media about mental health disorders. In future lessons, I'll be discussing how these disorders and their symptoms can affect one's ability to effectively communicate with others. So first I want to start off with OCD. I always hear students saying like, oh, when I start studying, I have to have my pen exactly so, and I have to have my water bottle just right here. My papers have to be completely lined up before I even start to write. That is not OCD. And that's not even ADHD. That is simply being particular. OCD is when you're washing your hands until your skin is cracked and bleeding, because if you don't wash it in this very specific way, someone you love dearly is going to die. Okay? That's OCD. OCD is if you knock over a box of Uncle Ben's Rice-A-Roni and you sit there and count every single piece as you pick it up. Because if you don't count every single piece, the world, I guarantee it, will explode. It's just going to happen. Okay? Locking and then relocking the locks 7, 10, 50 times. Oh, wait, you may have missed one. So you better start over again. Because if you don't, something horrible is going to happen. You don't know what that horrible thing will be, but I promise you it will be all your fault. You better check those locks again. So that's OCD. I've actually had students come up to me in the past saying thank you for explaining that one, because a lot of people are just like, oh my gosh, my OCD is so bad. And meanwhile, they were actually diagnosed with OCD and they were like, they have no idea what they're saying. It's a very not a great thing to be experiencing on a regular daily basis. All right, the next one I want to kind of redefine is depression. Dealing with students, they tend to experience a lot of the same symptoms of depression. They do tend to be lethargic. They get exhausted. The idea of getting out of bed is exhausting. But with depression, like legit depression, it's not just not wanting to get out of bed, but more like being physically incapable of getting out of bed. Even opening your eyes takes more energy than you have. The thought of breathing another breath, like, it takes effort. It's coupled with an extremely low self-worth of just not only being like, God, I'm so stupid, or I'm such a horrible person, but more so than that, where it's like, wow, the world would be so much of a better place if I wasn't in it. People would be so much better off if I didn't exist. Why was I even born, right? So it's that belief that your life isn't worth anything. In fact, suicidal ideation is not just a here and there passing thought. It's usually like every minute, every hour, like constantly thinking about it. How would you do it? How might people react? Who would show up at your funeral? If you got hurt, who would be at your bedside? Just driving down the road and looking at that guardrail and being like, wow, that guardrail looks pretty tempting today, you know? Uh, so even the inability to control your emotions in any way, shape, or form, like uncontrollably crying, not just crying, like sobbing, like bursting into tears the second you walk through the door. It's that kind of thing where it's complete depression. It just feels like there's a heavy weight on your shoulder. Like walking is difficult, moving is difficult, everything is just so much harder. And so when students say that they are suffering from depression, I get really concerned. And I'm like, okay, well, can you explain to me what's happening? A lot of times they're just really stressed. They're just tired. They have a lot going on. They're having a hard time sleeping. They feel overwhelmed. They have a lot of pressure on them, and that's absolutely understandable. However, for the most part, majority of the students that come to me with concerns of depression, for the most part, not from what I can tell, regardless, I do send them to the mental health services on campus. They are incredible. I do encourage people to reach out to someone with actual experience with diagnosing depression. I've never told someone that, oh, you're just stressed out, you're not really depressed, because I'm not here to minimize someone's experience. And I do take every single concern seriously. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help, because it's not a good time. And we are going to talk a little bit more about depression as well in a few moments here. But I did also want to talk about voices. Oh, we'll just say everyone has voices in their heads. It is not a uncommon thing. Most of us have at least 3 voices in our heads, whether they are our own voice or somebody else's voice. Usually it's the id, the ego, and the super ego, the little kid inside of us that just wants to do whatever we want. And I want this and I want this now. And then of course, there's the disciplinarian adult who says, you should do this or you shouldn't do that. And they tend to be very critical. Usually that's the voice of your parents or even yourself, just kind of being kind of a dick to yourself. And then there's, of course, the rational adult that most of us have that we like to ignore. But yeah, those voices are completely normal, natural, like we all hear them. There are a few people who actually don't have that internal monologue. I've met a few people, and they're very interesting people to say the least. But for the most part, the majority of people do have those voices in our heads. However, the voices that I'm talking about here is more so about people who are schizophrenic, right? And they have these voices inside of their heads that are telling them to do things. And they're usually not very friendly voices. In fact, they're usually telling the person to either harm themselves or harm other people. That negative voice inside your head, picture that, but like multiply it by a billion. It's that kind of like fierce, aggressive, violent ideation that are constantly nagging at you. And so I'm not going to get too far into that one. I do get into that into a different class, but not for this one. All right, so let's take a look at my little chart here. All right, so normal is about right here. Remember, quote unquote, normal. So this is where most people usually hang out in their emotional, mental states. It's usually not just a straight line. Usually it's kind of like, we have our little highs, we have our little lows, we go through things. Maybe something really great happened and we got aced that test, or maybe somebody died, and so we're kind of down here a little bit. But for the most part, we tend to hang out somewhere around here, and we just kind of have our ups and downs as life goes on. That's life, right? So that's kind of that quote unquote normal state that most people strive for. So we're just going to keep that line there. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at is the bipolar 1, bipolar 2. So with bipolar 1, it has this mania piece to it. Let's take a look at these here on the side. So we have mania, hypomania, which is like a little bit more elated than that normal state, but it's not quite to the mania where you tend to have hallucinations, sights, sounds, that kind of thing. Usually you think you can fly and actually really believe that you can fly, those kinds of things. Or you just kind of think that you're like a superhuman. You talk really, really fast. You're kind of just all over the place. Your rapid thoughts, rapid heart rate. You just can't sleep at all. At all. Your body will not let you. And so that state, honestly, is not something that you can kind of hold on to for very long. So normally it's followed by a crash. So with bipolar 1, you're usually hanging out in this normal phase for the majority of your life, actually. it's not until you start hitting that mania, which happens really fast, and lasts for maybe 1 to 2 days. Actually, I think it's around 3. I'm not mistaken. Kind of going on memory here. But usually after that 1 to 3 days, your body can't handle it. It has to crash. We have to sleep at some point in time. And so it's followed by a deep crash. And then it goes into this depression state. Now, this depression state, if you look down here, we have 5, 10, 15, 20. Those aren't days, those aren't minutes, those are within months. And so you kind of hang out there usually for about 1 to 8 months. Now, thinking back of how I kind of described what depression was, it's that constant state of like, God, I can't move. I'm so worthless. Like, people are better off without me, constantly thinking about suicide, being in that state for 1 to 8 months. So it's not just like a couple of days where maybe the thought crosses your mind, or maybe you're just super stressed out for a few weeks. It is literally months of being in the state. And little by little, for the most part, people tend to get a little bit better, especially if they reach out, get some help from the professionals, maybe get some medication, talk therapy, that kind of thing. And their goal is to hopefully eventually get back to that normalish state. Now, do keep in mind that most people, they do not have that up and down every 5 to 10 minutes or even once a month, as some people like to say. But it is more so like you go through this cycle maybe 2 or 3 times in a lifetime, over several years, right? So it's not something that happens consistently as many people would think. Now with bipolar 2, it's very similar, except the high isn't as high. So they might not get to the point where they have hallucinations, visual, auditory, that kind of thing, but they just kind of go up to the hypomania, and then they followed by the crash. So that's bipolar 2 right there. All right. I probably got left out there. Oh, is my mic? Yep, still working. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is depression. Now, with depression, I know we talked about it a little bit already, but I'm just going to get into it a little bit more as far as the timeline goes. So with depression, you usually hang out in that normal state for the most part, but sometimes every now and then something happens. And it doesn't necessarily have to be triggered by anything. It could just be like an internal state. There are lots of different theories as whether what causes the depression to be started, whether it's event-based or maybe there's like a chemical imbalance in the brain, or maybe some kind of triggering event of some sort. But basically you go from that normal state and you just drop. And again, you hang out down here for about 1 to 8 months on average, but it could potentially go on for years. Hopefully the person gets some treatment, will kind of reach that normal stage for a little while, but there's nothing that says that they won't drop back down into depression. With depression, it tends to be a lifelong issue, a lifelong struggle that people are dealing with. And it can in fact go all the way into old age. A lot of disorders tend to start later in life, or end earlier in life, but with depression, it can start pretty young and last your entire life. So it's not something that's just like, oh, this bad thing happened, now I'm super depressed for like 4 months, oh, and now I'm fine. It's something that is constantly reoccurring throughout life. And then there's this other one called dysthymia. This one isn't as common or well known, but it is something that's kind of popping up more and more frequently. So as we said, that quote unquote normal person has that normal state hanging around here. Whereas dysthymia, their normal state, like what their like go-to programmed mode, I guess you could say, is a little bit lower than everyone else. They still have their ups, they still have their downs, but they're just a little bit more sad. We'll say less happy, I suppose. Happiness, by the way, is an emotion. It is fleeting. It is not a state like this. It comes and goes just like anger. So a lot of people are striving for happiness, but do keep in mind that like happiness is not a goal. It is just a state of mind that lasts for a short period of time. just like being angry or sad, or whatever other feelings we have. So dysthymia is just kind of like that constant state of lowness. Picture Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. That's what dysthymia is. All right. Let me just kind of scroll through my notes, make sure I have everything here. Yeah. All right. So moving on to the next phase here. I should make some like really cool, funny like sound bit for that. Be like, ooh, whoop, or go go gadget, something or other. All right. So recently popularized disorders. I say recently, but it's just because I've been hearing about it more and more frequently recently. And that is things like ADD and ADHD. Yes, it's been around for a long time, but it's something that it's becoming more and more talked about. The awareness about it has become increased. However, even back when I was learning about all of this stuff, ADD and ADHD was way overdiagnosed by a lot. I don't have the specific numbers right now, but I do recall that it was usually overdiagnosed primarily for boys because they have that high energy. And now it's starting to get more into the girls as well. Generalized anxiety disorder, that's not so much just having anxiety about certain things or certain situations. Maybe you have some social anxiety where every time you have to have like a social interaction, your heart beats faster and you're like, oh no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to talk to people, right? So it's beyond that. It's more generalized, as in it's just a constant state of being anxious. PTSD and CPTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are something that has been around for a while now. However, it's been more and more mentioned just by my students and being brought up into conversations, especially that CPTSD. The more the conversation of narcissism has been being brought up, the attention on the complex post-traumatic disorder has been increasing along with it. And of course, we have the narcissistic and borderline. These are personality disorders that are being more popularized thanks to social media. Like I said, everyone has an ex that's a narcissist or a borderline. And again, there was that quote unquote split personality disorder, which is actually called dissociative identity disorder. That's when you have like multiple personalities within the one person. And of course, we have the antisocial. This one, a lot of people confuse of just being like against socializing or, that social anxiety. But antisocial is a little more complex than that. I'm not going to try to explain each of these in only a short little clip, especially since, like I said, I'm an English teacher, which means my job is to encourage you to do your own research. And I would suggest to stay away from doing social media to learn more about these disorders if that's something that you're interested in, but more so look into actual studies, things that have been peer reviewed, that are published in psychological academic journals, things that have information that's a lot more reliable and credible, not just kind of poking around and see what other people are saying, but more so the professionals. And I used to encourage students to spend like an hour or two to look into these different things, but I realized that even that is kind of like giving you a little bite size of all of the information that's out there. Like I said, there are professionals who spend decades researching in their fields, and we still don't know everything. So if there is a disorder that you want to research, feel free, by all means, go ahead, do that. But do keep in mind that there's very limited information in a lot of different places, and just kind of make sure you're getting the correct information from the correct places. And again, like I said before, none of this was to minimize any of your personal experiences. I'm not here to say, oh, if you haven't been diagnosed by a professional that you don't have it. That is not the case at all. That is not what I'm trying to say. But I am just trying to say, don't self-diagnose yourself based on a TikTok video that you had seen that you find relatable. They're kind of designed to make people relate to them, and they will usually make it generalized enough to where most people can relate to it. That's why they're so successful. With that being said, I think that's about it. For those of you who are my students, you do have some assignments that are associated with social media. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions. Make sure if you use any outside sources that you cite them just as was stated in the MLA citation video. With that, I think that is all. I hope you guys have a wonderful, evening. Have a great night. Bye.